Good morning to everyone watching in the United States, and good evening to those watching in South Korea. Back in May, we did an initial event on the KBO when it was one of the first sports leagues to restart during the pandemic. Now we're excited to take and have a second KBO event as we head to the stretch run. And, we've had a very competitive season this year in the KBO. To discuss the KBO and other baseball news, because we want to touch a little bit on some of the Koreans who are playing in MLB as well. We're excited to have some of our panel back from earlier this year, including Ambassador Mark Lippert, former MLB and KBO player Eric Hacker, and we hope to shortly have Daniel Kim, who is also expected to join with us today, who has his own YouTube channel and is a top analyst at DKTV. And we're also happy to have Jae-ho, who is a Yonhap News sports reporter. It covers the KBO extensively for Yonhap News. For those of you watching, if you have a question for our guests, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll set aside time for questions at the end. But I'd like to just sort of start off really briefly, with Ambassador Lippert. The start of the regular season for the KBO was delayed due to COVID-19, from March 28th to May 5th. But in contrast to what we've seen with MLB, where you have this shortened schedule of about 60 games and then a playoff, the KBO decided to play a full regular season of 144 games. Despite the delay in starting, how has KBO been able to put in or do a full season this year?
Well, thanks, Troy, and great to be here. Always a treat to see good friends, Jae-ho, Eric, Daniel may join, and I know we tried and failed to get Super Agent Esther here, who was one of our panelists from last time. She's, I think, a little busy with the end of the regular season, but we miss Esther, and I think we'll benefit from her counsel down the road at another event. So. I guess what I would say is the baseball season in Korea has not been played in a bubble, and the public health response by the Korean government has been world class. They've been at the very fore and vanguard of testing. They manufactured test kits early. They saw this coming early. They had been through it before. With MERS, and there was an immediate response. I think that's the first point, right? They were ready. They had the manufacturing capability. That's point one. Second, they implemented smart, effective public health measures that worked, for lack of a better term. And they did a number of things, which I won't detail here. That's for another webinar from KEI. But the practical effect of that is that they created a situation in Korea where we were talking at most, by the start of the season, at most hundreds of cases per day, right? And down to double digits as the season wore on. So in that environment, the league was played. I think that's the first point. The second point is then there were a number of precautions taken in and around the league in terms of attendance, started with no attendance and just toggled back and forth between light amounts of attendance, upwards of, which Gio and I were just talking about this off camera, upwards of 22%, spreading fans out, things of that nature. And then finally, testing regimes. And if you talked to Esther last time, you'll recall that she said there was tremendous self-discipline among the players as well, all reinforcing the science, the social measures that were put in place, as well as the norms. And together, all of that, I think, allowed the season to go forward. Final point, they had, contingency plans ready to go. Suspension for a couple weeks if there's positive tests, a plan that's still on the books, and Jae-ho knows this, to play games in the Dome after a certain duration in the postseason. So this was within a strong public health response. There was a really rigorous planning process in KBO that allowed the league to go forward. And touch wood, we're still on pace to conclude a 144-game regular season in a very effective, regular way that will allow all the games to be played and the records to be intact and all of that baseball fans love and appreciate. So I'll stop there and just add, before I get off the stage, it's been a great season. With the one caveat that my Bears are currently 4th or 5th based on today's schedule. It's been a fantastic season, ups and downs, which we'll get into in a little bit. And I'll stop there, Troy.
No, yeah, thanks. I mean, that's really great. And, I think, one of the things you touched on was sort of, the players and the way they handled the situation and everything. And, Jae-ho, I would just be curious because, we saw early on in MLB, the Miami Marlins had an outbreak of COVID. The Cardinals had an outbreak. Other teams as well had smaller outbreaks. Um, During the KBO season, were there any players who actually had to be quarantined due to COVID, or was the league able to sort of largely avoid the challenges MLB faced?
Yeah, we've had two players in the minor league of the KBO test positive. There was with the Hanwha Eagles system. And the first player to test positive, he wasn't even actually on the active roster on his minor league team. So he wasn't even playing a lot of the games. So I guess every one of his teammates, his coaching staff, team staff members got tested. Nobody else, other than the one other player, tested positive. So it didn't ultimately affect the schedule. The league didn't have to stop and quarantine everybody else. So the league went on, kind of like business as usual. So there was a little bit of a scare there early in the summer, but other than that, in the KBO proper, we haven't had any outbreak of any sort.
Oh, that's really great. And, I think maybe towards the end, I want to come back and talk a little bit about sort of, some of the lessons learned. But, Ambassador Lippert also talked about how exciting a season this has been. And so I want to kind of maybe turn now a little bit to sort of what's happened this year in the league itself rather than due to COVID. And so, Eric, you played for the NC Dinos. They were not picked necessarily to be the top team this year. They finished fifth last year. If you look at some of the U.S. sites, that people might be familiar with, ESPN had them sixth in their preseason ranking. Fangraphs, something I'm sure some baseball fans out there know, gave them an 11.6% chance of winning. Yet they've largely led the way from the beginning of the season. What's really been their secret this year?
I think a lot of it is leadership at the top. I think manager Dong Wook has done a great job leading that organization, leading that team. I think being around him in the past, you could see that those leadership skills and the players really take to him. I think so that really shows a testament to him and what he has done. And then also the leadership at the top, being able to put the pieces together, bring the players in that can produce and bring a culture to the field that, that's a positive environment that the younger kids can strive in. They're all comfortable to strive in. And then, obviously they get to play in one of the best ballparks now, which is beautiful. I look forward to seeing it. I think it's the additions to the team that really kind of, I think, got them over the hump. And then the health of, Na coming back this year and doing his thing, sitting in the middle of that lineup. And then obviously we know how important the foreign players are to their teams. And then keeping those guys healthy, keeping them on the field and those guys staying in the rotation and then not just staying in the rotation, but being productive at a high level. And it's not just pitching 5 or 6 innings, it's pitching deep into the ball game to save their bullpen. As we all know, the KBO, the bullpen can be exposed. And if it's exposed early, that's where you can get in trouble. And so for those guys being able to narrow that gap to the back end is just kind of sets them apart. And so, I think that I think they're in a great position here. I think, as we know, in the KBO, finishing first means so much. And then these guys can rest and then they get ready for the Korean series. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of great teams out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point because, for those who don't know, the one team gets a bye at the beginning of the season. At the beginning of the playoffs. So that really helps, I think, going into it. It's a crucial point. So if it looks like the Dinos right now are, most likely a lock, anything could change. We did see, they've had losing streak where they lost 4 in a row to the LG Twins, recently. So, things could change. But setting that aside, Ambassador Lippert, what do you think are some of the big stories you're looking to heading towards the playoffs? We have extremely tight race. I haven't updated for last night's games, but prior to that, you had 6 teams within 7.5 games of each other. The top 5 are the ones who make the playoffs, so not all those teams are going to advance. What do you think are some of the key stories to watch for, going forward for these last, couple weeks?
Well, first, I kind of want Jae-ho's take on that, but he's been following the league. But I'll hazard a guess and say, what I'm really interested is there's so much parity this year in the league. And even though NC has run away with it at the top, 2 through 6, arguably 7 have been just incredibly close, and 2 through 5, those slots have been incredibly close. And you look at the win matrix that Daniel Kurtz puts out on my KBO, and I have not, in recent memory, the team-to-team win-loss records 2 to 5, and even if you throw 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, are as close as I've seen in a while. There's not a team with clear dominance that has a clear kind of expectations. In Troy, you just mentioned NC goes and gets swept by the Twins recently. So you're watching Kium, who I thought a month ago was in really good shape to overtake NC and win the regular season. In the end, fall back all the way to 5th place. So that's what I'm interested in the playoffs, is that I think it's going to be an incredibly competitive playoffs. Eric's exactly right. The regular season is critical for rest. And then we'll see who is healthy, hot, not injured, and I think experienced. And I'll end on this point, which is I do think that there are some teams, as Eric mentioned with NC, who just kind of know how to win, right? And have that core of winning team, a winning experience core that gives them an intangible edge. So those factors together plus parity are the things I'm looking for. And I think it's going to be an exciting postseason with a lot of baseball left to be played in the regular season to determine who gets those second and third slots that are critical moving forward as the playoffs unfold, and rest and all the benefits that come associated with those buys in KBO.
So Jae-ho, what do you think are the top storylines we should be watching?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points to what Eric said earlier about teams finishing first, getting to buy into the Korean series. I think the rest will help even more than previous seasons, just because of how tight the season has played. We didn't have an All-Star break. If they had the Olympics in Tokyo, there would have been a 2.5-week break for the Olympics as well. So, without any break, with the 144-game season kind of jammed into a tighter window than usual, the guys are really more banged up than previous seasons. So having that 2.5-week off between the end of the regular season and the start of the Korean series will really come up huge for the team that gets there. Looks like it's going to be the Dinos. Now, in terms of how tight the pennant race has been, right now from 2 to 5, 1.5 games separating teams from 2 to 5. I think the 6th and 7th seed, the Kia Tigers and Lotte Giants, they've kind of faded away over the last few days or so. So I don't know that they have enough games left to make up any ground. But just looking at the top 4 for the top 5, I think this is officially the closest pennant race this late in the season in the current 10-team setting that dates back to 2015 when the KT Wiz came on board and the playoff expanded to 5 teams to include the wild card. So it's just a shame that fans have not been able to go to a lot of games this year. They would have had a lot to cheer for a lot of teams. They were, basically 70% of the league were in it until late September. So, I mean, you can't ask for more than that. And, the fans did come back actually, Tuesday night, tonight in Korea for the first time in about 2 months. The hope is that the teams are going to be able to have the fans in the stands during the postseason as well.
I know, and I think you're right that fan component, is a key part. I remember growing up, I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and when I was in high school, the Lookouts, the AA team at the time, Reds affiliated, they're now Reds affiliated again. I remember that first year that they had a really good team and they ended up winning the Southern League. But just being able to go, knowing it's a tight race, not knowing are they going to make it, will they be able to win? It's that type of excitement, that really can make for a great season. Everybody wants to have a dominant team that blows everybody away, but in some ways, those tight, seasons are the ones that really kind of stick with you and everything. Jae-ho, just to stick with you a second as well.
Sure.
One of the teams we talked about how NC is, played better this year than, a lot of people probably expected. the KT Wiz, if, maybe at least overperformed some people's expectations as well. Sort of, what have kind of been some of the strong points for them?
K2 Wiz, I kind of had him in my top 5, but I didn't think they would be in top 2 conversation, this late in the season. I'm surprised as anybody right now. Earlier in the year, their bullpen has some issues, like, a couple of other teams in the league, but they were always going to hit. They had some, professional hitters in the lineup, including Mel Rojas Jr., who's threatening to win the Triple Crown. He was second before tonight's game. He was second in batting average, first in homers, and first in RBIs. Now, say what you will about homers and RBIs, but they're still pretty valuable, I would think. And he's also the leader in some of the other categories as well. And with him in the middle of the lineup, they've got former Rookie of the Year Kang Baek-ho also hitting, former one-time Major Leaguer Hwang Ji-kyun in the lineup, one breakout star in Bae Jung-dae, the center fielder, who used to be a glove first guy, but this year he's almost a 2020 threat. He's got 4 walk-off hits himself. I think 3 of them came in the month of September. So they've got some really great bats in the lineup. They just needed to have the bullpen kind of settle down, get their act together, and the pitching has come around. And I think combined it with the timely hitting that they've always been able to have. They've come this far, and it looks like they're going to go to the playoffs for the first time in the franchise history,
which will be really great for their fans. So Eric, you talked earlier on about, one of the key things for NC has been the leadership, management. To add a little bit of like DC flavor to some of this, former Nats manager Matt Williams is now the manager for the Kia Tigers. How has his transition to the KBO been?
I think he's doing well. I think sometimes as a foreign player or coach, I mean, yeah, immediate results and immediate winning and immediate championship is great, but I think those expectations sometimes are sometimes a little high because of the adjustments that are needed. And for when you're leading a pack of many guys like him in different cultures and different personalities, it takes a little bit of time to adapt to that. I think we were talking about the playoff line. I mean, they're right outside that top 5 right now, but as we all know, that can change very quickly, as we talked about a sweep, or a 5-game winning streak, and somebody loses 5 in a row. And in a 10-team league, those standings can change quickly, and we've seen that in the past. I mean, I've been a part of some of those chases where you get down to the end, and it literally goes down to those last couple games, and it still could happen. And so I think his leadership skills, his history, and the things that he's seen, I think that's where you'll see him strive, right? But I think the interesting thing will be is when Matt gets to come back, next year, and let's see what happens next year. But he also have to understand, his players and the cards he's been dealt, and understand his expectations of what he's doing with what he has, right? Some of his players with Kia, they have gotten a little bit older in their careers. We've seen some of those guys, and we've seen some younger guys start to emerge, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out for him. But I think his transition, he's done well.
Yeah, and I think, this is a really hard period because, not only are you coming to a new country, a new team, new players and everything, and you're trying to adapt to that, but you're also adapting at a time where the league itself is adapting to an entirely new circumstance. So I think, even to be in it at this point, is probably a big success, on his end, given all the challenges that, they're facing right now.
Yeah, I would agree totally.
So Jae-ho, we've talked a little bit about teams overperforming, but you also have, some teams who necessarily haven't performed as well as you would expect. SK Wyverns, probably been a disappointment. What didn't click for them this year?
Well, that's an understatement, disappointment. I think a lot of things, pretty much everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong for them. Last year, I think was 15th of August. Normally that would be in the second half of, toward the end of the season. And they were in first place. And the Doosan Bears, who ended up actually taking the first place at the end, they were 9.5 games back. and SK Wyverns ended up finishing second place. And the problem was that they didn't hit. They just stopped hitting. And this is a club that led the league in homers in 2017 and in 2018. I think they set a record in 2017 and came up one shy in 2018. And all of a sudden, second half of 2019, they just stopped hitting. And they came back in 2020. Things didn't change. And they lost a couple of key pieces. Kim Kwang-hyun, and right now pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals. He went to the majors. And Angel Sanchez, one of the other pitchers in their rotation. I think he might have won close to 20 games. He was gone too, and they never replaced the kind of arms in their rotation. A couple of guys that they signed in their places. Nick Kingham, he was injured. I think he pitched 2 games and he got cut because of an injury. Ricardo Pinto, he had actually a no-hitter bid in his first start through 6 innings, and it's been all downhill since for him. He's got some issues with his, controlling his emotions on the mound. He has some run-ins with his catchers and the coaching staff also. So a lot of things have gone wrong for them. And one new foreign player that they signed in place of Nick Kingham, Tyler White, position player, I think he played 4 games because he got hit by a pitch twice, 2 different hands, 2 broken bones in both hands. So, a lot of unlucky breaks. And their manager, Yum Kyung-yup, he actually fell ill in the middle of a game back on June 25th. He was hospitalized. He came back at the beginning of September, lasted 5 more games, and he went back to, went off to the sidelines once again. So it's been a very challenging year for the Wyverns. This is a team that's only 2 seasons removed from a championship. So it's almost hard to believe, even considering the pieces that they've lost, a lot of the key players are still there. And to see that team to have that kind of fall from grace, it's been pretty incredible, in different sense of the word.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I mean, you do see this sometimes. I think for me, one of the classic examples, is the San Antonio Spurs when David Robinson got hurt. And so sometimes you can have a quick turnaround and everything. And so it'll be interesting to see if, they're able to regroup next year and everything. But yeah, you sort of expect there to be sort of almost a gradual, rise of the teams. They reach the peak with their players and then you have a gradual fall. But yeah, in some cases you just have these quick, declines. We've talked a little bit about, some of the players, some who are doing well and everything. And I want to talk a little bit more about the players, but before we do that, I want to give, Ambassador Lippert a chance. We all know you're a big Doosan Bears fan. Where do you see them? They're obviously still in contention, maybe, a little bit below where, we would have thought and hoped they'd be this year. What do you see like the rest of the season shaking out for them being?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. And maybe I could just pick up on a couple themes that both Eric and Jae-ho hit on earlier, and then get to the Doosan question because I think they made some very interesting points. And I'm not the deep expert that they are. I'm just more the casual fan who, as ambassador, spent way too much time at KBO stadiums. But I digress there. I guess what I would say is first, what I think the points about how exciting the regular season is and can be in KBO, I think I just want to underscore that point and remind people that last year, the regular season came down to the last at bat of the last game and was largely a function of a tiebreaker and a tie that ensued the previous weekend. I mean, it was a wild finish, right? And I think we're set up for another type of finish, at least 2 through 5 this year that I think basically emphasizes why this league is so fun and entertaining and draws such a passionate fan base. The second thing that I think dovetails with the first is that, and Eric mentioned this a little bit, touched on it, the league's kind of streaky, right? And it's kind of fun, right? And I think we've seen not long streaks this year, but mini streaks. And these mini streaks have played into that drama with everybody packed in tight, pennant race, and these streaky performances, I think, based a lot on fatigue, injury, and Jae-ho's point about everybody being crunched into a tight regular season, all of that. The third thing I just wanted to point out that I think is interesting that we haven't touched on is, the lack of fans in terms of that culture and its impact on possible performance, right? Because I'm thinking in terms of, say, Kia, that has one of the most passionate fan bases. And you go to Champions Field and it is, packed and there's a lot of energy. On the flip side, KT might have benefited a little bit, not to take anything away from the outstanding season that they have, but you go to some KT Wiz games in Suwon and there's 3/4 of the ballpark are filled with the opponent's fans. And so they have had the benefit of playing in these, reduced fan or fanless environments. I'm interested in kind of Eric's take on that last point. Bookmark that if you would. On Doosan, I think it's, and I'm interested in both takes. It just feels like to me it's Eric's point about relief pitching, right? They've lost some starters to MLB. They've gotten into the bullpen deeper than they should. You've seen the manager reshuffle closer, starting pitcher roles, bring people out of the bullpen as starters, vice versa. They've just, I think, struggled with that part of the piece. Having said that, I'll end on this. They do have that winning core, right? And you look back a week, 3 weeks ago, and it looked like they were in, 5th place and going to stay there. And now all of a sudden they're tied for 4th, and I think a game to a game and a half out of 2nd, right there. And I think last week that, the last couple of weeks they've, put together some pretty decent weeks, and they won again today. So I'm really, they're a team that I think is going to be really formidable in the stretch, just because they're experienced, they know how to win. They tend to bring it all together at the end, like last season. And so I'm, hope springs eternal for me with the Bears, but I think I have some validity in the underlying data to support my theory, and I'll stop there.
So, Eric, I would like to sort of pick up on this point about the fans and Ambassador Lippert raises. I've seen this, in MLB. Clearly, this season, only 60 games. You have the short sample size issue and everything to deal with. But this idea that, there have been some players who've struggled potentially because they didn't have the fans to sort of, draw off of and everything. So as a former player, how much do you think that's impacted some of the performances?
I think it's impacted them a lot, right? And I think that's the hard thing as an athlete, as a player in these challenging times, is now you have to make the adjustment to figure out what else is going to fire you up, what else is going to get you going. And you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper. Some guys can do that a little easier and some can't, and I'll speak for myself, for instance. For me to walk into a packed environment, whether it was at home or on the road, that stuff got me fired up, right? You guys could probably see some of the games that I had pitched, even on the road. That was fun. And these guys, they're not going to get that feeling, and maybe they will, right? I guess we don't know what the KBO is going to do at that point, but I don't know if they're going to be limited even through the Korean series. I'm assuming there'll probably be some limited to a certain degree, but so, you may see guys strive in this environment that we maybe didn't expect, because maybe the lower pressure environment's better for some guys. So you kind of have to look at it from different angles. And I think Mark is right. And, like Doosan, for instance, speaking of them kind of getting in there, I think that's going to be the hard thing for, say, like KT. I think if KT can keep himself in that number 3-2 spot, kind of keep himself up there, it'll serve them better. KT, unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast. You want to avoid of facing somebody like Doosan in a wild card situation. They've been there, they've done that. And maybe even their season hasn't gone as well, but once you get in the postseason, everything else is out the window. And it doesn't matter what happened at that point. And now it's one game now, and it's one game, and it's one game at a time. And a team like Doosan can do some damage as long as they sneak in there. And so it'll be fun to watch down the stretch. And I think we've, as fans, have found ourselves watching the game differently now. And we've all kind of gotten past the fan thing, and we've kind of let that go. We've accepted that, and now we've been able to focus a little bit more on the players, the coaching style, and all that. And Mark talked about a team like KT, like if all the fans were playing or were invited into the games right now, and they had a home game against Doosan, it would be like a home game. It would be a home game for Doosan. It wouldn't be a home game for KT. And I had that same challenge even with NC when we were a new organization. I mean, we would walk out to our stadium and we would look around and we would feel like we're on the road. And it makes you kind of, I don't know, sad is the right word, but it's the cards you've been dealt, and it's the organization you play for, and you love who you play for, and you're going to give them everything you got, and you kind of want to prove everybody wrong. So I'm really excited for a team like KT to see what they can do. And obviously being an NC guy, I hopefully they'll do their thing, but it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, no, I think it's gonna be a lot of fun heading down the stretch run and seeing how they do in the playoffs. So, Jae-ho, I wanted, like I said, sort of turn to some of the individual players. You mentioned the season Mel Rojas Jr. has had. He was really good in 2018, but he's been even better, this year. But, sort of, what do you think has maybe helped him take it even maybe to another level this season? And then are there any other, we mentioned some of the international players who you think have, really kind of stood out, this year in the KBO?
Yeah, with Mel, I spoke to him earlier in the year when he was really, playing well, he's hitting over 400 or close to it anyway. And he talked about how starting the season later in the year, in May, as we did this year, it kind of helped him because, typical season, the season would begin late March, early April. It would still be kind of chilly outdoors, and hitters kind of tend to thrive in warmer conditions. And the fact that the season began in May this year, I think it helped him and also some couple of other hitters. I spoke to Preston Tucker of the Kia Tigers about that, and he also agreed that he felt a little better at the start of the season than in a normal year, because it was a lot warmer when the season got around, and maybe the pitchers had a little more trouble getting sort of ramped up to start the season on time after having such an extended kind of interrupted spring training, whereas the hitters, they were better able to kind of maintain their rhythm from spring training and heading right into the regular season and kind of hit the ground running there. So Rojas, yeah, again, as I said, he might win the Triple Crown, which would make him the first to do it in, I believe, 9 years in the KBO. So which would also make him a front runner for the MVP, especially the fact that their team is probably headed to the postseason for the first time. So he's going to get some love, I think, from us media for the MVP voting. Jose Miguel Fernandez of the Doosan Bears, he's threatening to set a single season record for hits. I believe that's 2 or 4, a little over 200 by Seogan Chung of the Kium Heroes from 2012 season. They didn't play 144 games then. He still hit over 200 hits. He still got over 200 hits. Obviously, right now, teams are playing 144 games, a few more games than before. But Jose has made it clearly known that he wants to get the record. He came up a little short last year. He kind of, hit into, I guess, hit a wall a little bit toward the end of last year. But this year, he's pretty determined to get the record, which will also help the team, I guess, going to the postseason. Some of the Korean players, I mentioned, briefly touched upon Bae Jung-dae of the KT Wiz. What a surprise. I don't think anybody expected any sort of offensive production from this kid, but he's doing well. And he's one of the players that has actually changed his given name. That's been actually a trend in the KBO. The Korean athletes, some of the players, they tend to put a lot of stock in their names and what they mean. And some of the players have had some success after changing their names. One of the more prominent players to do so would be Son Ah-seop of the Lotte Giants. I don't even know if people even recall what he used to be called, because he's been an all-star since he got his new name. Right now, he's leading the league in batting average, just ahead of Mel Rojas Jr. Couple of other players to talk about. Eric's former teammate, Na Sung-bum. He missed a lot of last year with a knee injury, pretty devastating. Knee injury, almost career-threatening, but he bounced back really nicely. It's already set or pretty close to setting his career high in homers, 100 plus RBIs once again. He will be eligible for posting for major league clubs this offseason. He's already got Scott Boras as his agent, so that's a good first step. So he's going to draw some interest from the U.S. market, U.S. clubs. Kim Ha-sung, the shortstop / third baseman for the Kiwoom Heroes, he's also going to be posted most likely this winter. The fact that he plays such a premium position and he can really rake at the plate at this level anyway, I think he's got the talent to do pretty similar damage against MLB pitching.
Yeah, I think, posting and sort of the postseason is one of the things that'll be really interesting. And I kind of wish we had Esther, here kind of talk about this because, you could see Wrigley in the background there, Cubs fan, Tom Ricketts keeps talking about how, there's historic, financial losses this year. I think the phrase he might have used was biblical or something along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see how, this shakes off, in terms of when free agency rolls around, what players are able to get, I think, to be honest, if I were a free agent this year, I'd probably only want a 1 year, 2 year contract to try and, sort of come back to the market when hopefully things are, back, somewhat to normal and everything. But it'll be interesting to see how the posting system works, what, the players are willing to take to maybe come to the US and everything, knowing that maybe they're not going to get as much money as they would have normally. Sticking though with, player performance this year and everything, Eric, Oh Sung-won, had a really tough year last year with the Rockies when he got traded over. He's back in Korea with the Samsung Lions. How has he done this season? And, maybe are there any other pitchers who really kind of stood out to you this year as a former pitcher that you think have really excelled?
I think O has done well. I think sometimes you have to understand. He's 38 years old at this point. And I think to expect the production that you saw from him 10 years ago is not going to happen. But I think for him to be able to dive right back into where he was, where he was previously, is good. And I think not just his performance, but I think just having a guy like him in the clubhouse is big for an organization, regardless of the production of the organization and the results. But just, for the young ones to be around somebody that has had the success he's had, and to see a guy like him work. I don't know what, how he is, if he's a vocal type of leader or if he's just a lead by example kind of guy, maybe a combination of both. I'm not sure. But I think ultimately it's good for the young players to learn from a guy like that. So I think his transition is done well. I think he's done good. I think even statistically, he looks pretty solid. Maybe not the O that we're all accustomed to seeing with the high strikeout rate and all that. But still, I think he's done well. Guys that have set them started to kind of stand out a little bit. I haven't been able to kind of follow enough to really say I can put my hands on a Korean player. But the shortstop for Kiwoom, I think he's, set himself up in a nice position moving forward. If, whether he stays or whether he goes, he's in a good position. He's a great player. I like the way he plays the game. He's a little guy with big time power and big time production. He plays big. If you were to be around him, you wouldn't expect that type of production out of a guy like him. And so I'm excited to watch and see what Ha-sung can come up with moving forward. So that'll be fun to watch. I don't know. I'm excited about a lot of these young guys. It's going to be fun to watch over the next several years.
Yeah, no, I always, love watching, the new prospects, trying to figure out who is going to be, sort of the next big star and who's going to really break out and what will maybe make them different and exciting. So, I want to transition a little bit back to, this question about, fans, and maybe talk a little bit, like I said earlier on, some of the Koreans now who are in MLB, who we all know as well. But, Jae-ho, we've mentioned that, as of today, you have fans back, in the stadiums, even if at limited capacity. MLB has said that for, the NLCS and the World Series, which are both going to be played at Global Life Field in Arlington, Texas, that they are going to allow fans back, at least on a limited capacity and in sort of bubbles. Based on the KBO's experience, are there any suggestions that you would make for MLB that, they should do, or maybe things they should avoid when, having fans come, to these two playoff series?
Yeah, with the health and safety protocols, I think MLB did take some cues from the KBO in terms of operating the season. If you look at the manuals, and I think a lot of that actually came from the KBO manual book, such as for players anyway, wearing masks, no spitting, no high-fiving and all that. Now, in terms of fans, we have quite a bit of a restrictions. I don't even like the word restrictions, but they're what they are for fans. Have to wear the masks, no eating or drinking from the seats. You got to obviously sit apart from one another. Even if you're traveling in group, even with your family, your own children, you've got to be apart with them, separated from them. You can't sing or chant, basically no vocal cheering, which is a pretty essential part of KBO viewing experience in person, but that's been taken away. So it's a lot of, I guess, clapping, a lot of, dancing, but there's a lot that the fans are not allowed to do in the pandemic. I think I don't know about the MLB fan protocols. I think I saw the fans actually sitting pretty, right next to each other in today's NLCS game. That's probably not a good look, given the conditions and circumstances right now in the US. And I'm sure they're testing people coming, or at least testing the temperatures when they come in. And you got to just make sure that you got to stay with the limited capacity and to have the fans apart. Like with the KBO situation, the government, when they eased some of the social distance restrictions, they said professional teams could have up to 30% of the crowds based on the stadium capacity. But the KBO teams will stick to lower 20% range because in some stadiums, they're not big enough to go to 30% without compromising safe distance. So obviously, more fans, the better it is for their bottom lines, but they're not going to take the risk. They're going to stay with the lower range, safer range to make sure the fans are spread apart. And I think MLB should take note of that. And you talked about economy of MLB. I think Francisco Lindor, the shortstop for the Cleveland Indians, when he was asked about his own free agency, he said, hey, MLB just signed a $3 billion contract with the TV rights. So, I don't know if this is an industry that's necessarily struggling, but I do know for a fact that KBO is actually struggling because of no gate receipts. And this is a very gate-driven league. And the postseason also is going to be.
You accidentally went on mute, Jae-ho.
Teams are going to be, taking revenues from. They're going to have the revenues distributed based on their gate receipts in the postseason, but it looks like we're not going to have enough fans to have the teams make enough money. So, I guess I digress on their point, but in terms of like fan safety, yeah, you just don't want to take any chances, I think, when it comes to having the fans back in the seats.
Yeah, no, I saw the Francisco Lindor comments, and he was very blunt about they can afford to keep me. It'll be interesting because, the teams are so opaque about their books and how much, funding they really have, their revenue, their losses and everything. Though the one exception to this is because the Atlanta Braves, Liberty Media spun them off, and they're actually, you can buy shares in the Atlanta Braves. So they have to be more transparent in their books. So I think it'll be interesting to see after the season what Atlanta's books look like. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about, a few of, the Korean players, because, I think this is one of the other great parts of the game is that, now you have, this group of Korean players in the United States as well. Ambassador Lippert, we mentioned earlier that Kim Kyung-won came over. He was with the Cardinals this year. Clearly, not a regular season, not a normal spring training and everything. How do you think, given, these circumstances, his transition to MLB was?
Yeah, Troy, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it dovetails with some of your comments earlier about Matt Williams going the other way, right? You've got this, what's a hard, if you talk to everybody or not everybody, but if you talk to Korean players who've come to the United States, and it also echoes what Eric said from the last time we did this. You've got this big cultural cultural moment in terms of adaptation that the player has to go through. Number one. Number two, you've got all these language and sort of team structure issues. And then number three, you're expected to play at the highest levels of sport in the world. And this year you're adding the pandemic to it. So I guess what I'd say is I just kind of view this year as, an atypical year. I think you have to count it as an outlier. For those who do well this year, terrific. It's a great foundation. For those who do a little bit below average or aren't as optimized as they might otherwise have been, I just think you can't read too much into it. It is such a strange year. It is such a strange environment, both in the United States and in the stadiums themselves, that I just would not want to play analyst and read too much into it. So I think that's the first point. I think the second point that I'm interested though in is, do we get back next year? How do we get back? And do we play a full season? And I think that's an interesting question. And we've got all of these posting free agency issues out there, but I think we risk burying the lead a little bit. I think we all assume there's going to be a vaccine early next year, but is the vaccine, you get into these science questions that I think will inform. And I think that's an interesting bucket that is yet to be really unpacked, understandably so, because we're headed down the postseason stretch. And we've got half the league of KBO vying for contention here. And, that's the story, right? The story's on the field. But right after the season ends, we're going to have to turn to those issues pretty quickly. And I think look at those issues through US, Korea, science, and sport lenses and unpack that in fairly short order, because you're going to have, because of the late postseasons, you're going to have just a few months to make a bunch of decisions that are going to impact the league going forward, both leagues going forward.
Yeah, no, and I think, this is an interesting topic and everything. And, we do, obviously everyone hopes there's a vaccine sooner rather than later. And, a lot of people, or some people have talked about, that maybe there'll be a decent amount of vaccinations, some point, by the middle of next year, at the latest. But, it does impact the seasons going forward. And I mean, clearly the NBA is on a slightly different timeline, but they've been talking a lot about this recently because, now with the finals having been concluded, they're sort of faced with this question. And, one of the things that I think is interesting in their case is that, one, there's sort of an understanding between the league and the players that they can't do a full season in the bubble. So they have to figure out something totally different to do. And so in some ways, the KBO here is, almost a good model, not just for MLB, but for the NBA. But at the same time, they have these issues. One, they don't want players getting hurt because there's not enough off-season time. Two, they need to make sure all the protocols are right. So, I mean, what I was reading is that they basically are flexible. The season could start in January, it could start in February, maybe even as late as March for the NBA next year. And so I think you're going to see a lot of this sort of roll over, into MLB, as well. Like, when do you start the season? I think MLB really needs to look at, how this year went. I mean, could you afford, over a full 162 game season to have, as much disruption as, they had in a 60 game season this year? So I think, there's a lot to look at here. And I don't know, Jae-ho, do you have any thoughts on how this might impact the KBO, this whole idea of where we are maybe, at the beginning of next season, and what changes might have to stay in place or change differently from this year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the start of the next season will have to be pushed back. Typical year would start late, probably last week of March. And especially with the Olympics next year, if the Olympics do take place, the KBO would have to consider putting in the sort of the 17, 18-day break so that the KBO players would go and play for the country. So they would push back the postseason also to November territory, even with the March start. But because the season is going to end at the end of November, and the teams are not going to be able to travel to the U.S. or warm regions of Japan for their spring training. The spring training will also be pushed back to, I would think, maybe February, March, and then I think we're looking at an April or another May start of the regular season. Possibly they would shorten the schedule instead of sticking to 144 games. Maybe they would cut it to 120 something range, and so that we will be more reasonable given the tighter window. So just in terms of their operation aspect, I think it's going to be a while until we get back to the things the way they before.
So I want to briefly touch on two more, Koreans who are in MLB. Jae-ho, I know you're a big Blue Jays fan. Roo Hyun-jin signed there in the offseason. How do you think the Blue Jays did, and how do you think Roo did? And Eric, as a former pitcher, I'd love to get your thoughts on his season as well, because Roo Hyun-jin was phenomenal last year for LA.
Yeah, Ryu was he was the runner-up for the Cy Young Award in National League last year, and then this year, for this season, he signed a 4-year, $80 million contract with the Toronto Blue Jays, and became the highest-paid pitcher in their team history. And he was going to be the opening day starter in March. Ended up being at the end of July. He did pretty well, 5-2, 2.69 ERA. He was fourth in the ERA in the AL, and I think he was just a kind of a sort of the stabilizing force at the top of the rotation that the Blue Jays were hoping they were getting with that kind of money. It didn't go as well in the postseason. The Blue Jays lost to the Tampa Bay Rays in the Wild Card Series, a team that has another Korean player, Choi Ji-man, who's actually just become the first Korean position player to play in ALCS. They're 2 games away from reaching the World Series right now, so he would become the first position player from Korea to get to the World Series with 2 more victories. So going back to Ryu, he's 33 years old. Maybe the last couple of years, maybe the last year of the deal might not look so pretty with the kind of money, but I think they're banking on really good production, at least for the first couple of seasons from him.
Eric, you have any additional thoughts on Roo Hyun-jin?
Yeah, I think Ryu has done well. I mean, obviously with this whole conversation about the pandemic and the things that have gone on, and Ryu and his family, and they introduced their baby to the world, and there's so many different avenues of things that go through all of our careers, and at the end of the day, he's a professional, right? Just like the rest of the players, and our job as players, as for myself, former player, at the end of the day, everything that's going on the outside, you have to be able to put your blinders on, and your job is to produce, right? And that's why the guys get paid the money that they get paid. I think Ryu has done a tremendous job in Toronto, to be able to step into a new environment in the middle of a pandemic. He's not even pitching in his home stadium, to be thrown in a stadium that he didn't sign to play in Buffalo. He signed to play in Toronto. And so it's just all those little things that change, right? I mean, we all can say, oh, the last game he pitched, was his playoff game. What wasn't so great, but on the big scale of things, he did his job. To finish what I think you said, finished 4th in ERA. One bad game in a shortened season like this can really mess up an ERA. And so I think he's done well, and I think he will continue to do well. I think one thing about Ryu is a pitcher. He's not a thrower. He's not relying on swing and misses. He knows how to pitch, and that's going to take him to the back end of his contract. And I could still see this type of production. For me, I'm seeing a guy like him. I could see him still producing at a high level at the back end of his contract, based on his style of pitching. I think he'll do fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, we focus on stuff a lot, but being able to pitch is, I think, often underrated.
Absolutely.
And I mean, Kyle Hendricks threw what was like a 1 or 2 hitter to start the season this year, and he didn't throw anything. He didn't even hit 90. So, sometimes just knowing what you're doing, is really key. So just a reminder, if you have a question in the audience, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. I do have one question I want to ask. So Edgar would like to know, now that the KBO has some exposure to the US audience, is there any possibility of US network to keep broadcasting? As we all know, ESPN picked up the games this year after COVID. And what would it be able to take and sustain basically KBO fans in the US and worldwide? And I'd also be interested in getting, thoughts on how the partnership with ESPN went. I don't know, maybe we'll start with Jae-ho and then Ambassador Lippert and Eric, if you have any thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, sure. With ESPN, they're going to broadcast through the postseason this year. I think Daniel, if you're here, you might have a better idea of how the deal is structured than I am. But with KBO beginning in May, at a time when MLB was still kind of trying to get back, the owners and the union were still negotiating a return deal. You kind of feel the void, I think, for a lot of baseball fans in the US. I think before this year, maybe some of the hardcore baseball fans would know about the KBO, but it was obviously difficult to watch any live games, given the time difference and all that. And I think KBO had been some sort of a novelty, maybe, bat flips, chicken and beers and a lot of cheering. But that was the extent of people's knowledge of KBO for the most part anyway. But I think this has been a great opportunity for the product itself to be showcased to the US audience. Not every game has been great, I would think. There's might have been some bullpen meltdowns, some leading changes and some defensive, fielding miscues and all that. But that's all part of the game. I think some people take a kick out of that. It's different. It's different. It's the same game, but it's somewhat different than Major League Baseball. And I think a lot of people have enjoyed that aspect of the KBO. There was a hashtag KBO is wild. It kind of went viral early in the year on Twitter when people started seeing some of the KBO games on ESPN. So I would hope that they're going to continue to carry KBO games down the road. In all my years of covering this league, there's never been this much international exposure to this league. Eric and I have both been on ESPN telecast as guest analysts. I was actually on this just a couple of hours ago for one of the games today. So it's always a pleasure for me personally to talk about Korean baseball to new audience, to try to promote this the game of baseball the way we play over in Korea.
Yeah, maybe just to dovetail, and I know we're running out of time here. I guess what I would say is, first of all, I've also been on ESPN, Jae-ho, so yes. What's going on. I have the club jacket too. But in all seriousness, the thing that I'm interested in is if we ever get back, once we get back, let me put it that way, to a more travel-oriented environment. And what I'm fundamentally interested to see is if the television, audience here in the United States goes to Korea and touches the games, right? In some way, is there some portion of that? Now, it's a long flight, it's a long trip, but given that now there's a lot of interest in Korean pop culture with BTS, with Parasite, there's just a lot of draw, I think, to go to Korea in ways that has broken Korea out of sort of Asia experts or people who love travel in Asia into a potentially wider pool of people that might go to Korea, and as part of that trip, touch KBO. And I think what I'm always interested to see is once you get a touch plus the ability to watch it here at home, does that cause something to catalyze in terms of a sustained viewer base here in the United States, or something that is a little bit of niche content that finds a home somewhere in the United States, but then is kind of part of a evolving and growing culture of interest in the United States of Korean pop culture writ large. I'm interested in kind of that interplay as well. And I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Eric?
Yeah, I hope, right, that we will continue to see this grow. I think that when this pandemic started and the KBO was trying to figure out what they were going to do, and Major League Baseball was trying to figure out what they were going to do, everybody was scrambling, right? They're scrambling to try to make something happen very quickly. So when it happened, it was just, let's go, right? And I think with now that that ESPN or other networks or whoever it might be and the KBO, I think as they move forward, they'll start to sit down and they'll come up with ideas, right? And I think that this worldwide opportunity, and I could very well see this growing into not just the KBO, but into Japan and the other professional leagues as well, and maybe seeing a combination of all these things, right? So maybe, maybe we see some games coming out of the KBO, we see some games coming out of Japan, and we really see a worldwide opportunity here. I think it's going to be about, who's willing to do that, who's going to jump on board and do that. And I think from a media standpoint, I see having guys, men, women on the ground in these other countries being able to have interviews, live interviews, or recorded interviews with these players, with coaching staff, and all that, just like you would have here with the teams here, and I think it could be done. I think it's going to be about obviously who's going to put the work in to make that happen. I would love to see that happen. I would love to be a part of something like that. I think that there's the fans here in the U.S. that didn't even understand that there was baseball in other countries, and now they're saying, "Wow, that's pretty cool." A lot of people have been very entertained by it. As Jae-ho mentioned, that it's very different, and it's it's a style of baseball that a lot of people here are very entertained by, more so than watching even Major League Baseball. And so I think that we will see, to a certain degree, of this coming together. I hope that the KBO buys into what's happening. I think it'll help drive the KBO from a revenue standpoint and opportunities there that will help the league. I think Jae-ho touched earlier about, that the KBO has not done very well this year, and makes sense, right? There's not any fans. And so I think you might see these opportunities that might help them survive this pandemic and then grow to bigger opportunities.
Well, I want to thank you all. This has been a really great discussion. It's been a clearly challenging year that's required a lot of creativity and thought and everything, but it's also, within all of that chaos, I think been a really great and exciting season. I'd like to thank you all for coming on today to talk about that a little bit more and let people know a little bit more about the KBO. Thank you.
No, thanks, Troy. And I'm just going to end by saying, so there's two opportunities for Eric here. One, get recalled to a KBO team, which, is not that far off. And two, be a plank holder of this new Pan-Asian television venture. So, this is, let's put it this way, I'm buying some future stock in Eric today, going on the Eric market. It's all good.
Yeah, it would be a team effort, that's for sure. We'd have to pull a team together to make it happen. Guys like yourself that could really grow something like this. But always a pleasure on my end. Thank you guys for being a fan of the game, a fan of the KBO, of all you guys, the effort and that you guys put into it. It's always a pleasure to be on the cast here with you guys and speak baseball with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Thanks.